Hello and welcome to China 24's special year-end program, China Resets. I'm Wang Mengmeng in Beijing. With 2022 nearly here, perhaps most of us share the feeling that 2021 has gone by way too fast. And we ask, has it been a better year than last? Well, that depends on where you are and what you've experienced. We know we can't speak for everyone. But China 24 has been reporting on the changes in this country, the hopes and the despair, the milestones and the unknown, the divides and the homecomings, the space adventures and the preparations for a sports extravaganza. Let's now walk through the highs and lows. A key word of China this year is rejuvenation. We witnessed the centenary of the founding of the CPC, the Communist Party of China. Over the past 100 years, China has transformed itself into the world's second largest economy and is playing an active role on the world stage. In 2021, China also achieved its goal of Xiaokang, building a moderately prosperous society in all respects. And now the country embarks on a journey to becoming a great modern socialist country by its second centenary. 2021 also marks the beginning of the 14th five-year plan, the blueprint that lays out China's development and progress towards common prosperity. But to sustain this rejuvenation, it's important to look back and learn lessons from the trials and triumphs of the past 100 years. Our reporter Sun Ye has the details.
Ask anyone what the biggest day is for the country in 2021, and many would say July the 1st, for what took place on that day here on the Tiananmen Square. It's the centenary of the Communist Party of China, marking 100 years of struggle and hard-earned changes to create a better nation. General Secretary and Chinese President Xi Jinping declared then that China had realized the first centenary goal of building a moderately prosperous society in all respects. And that the nation had brought about a historic resolution to the problem of absolute poverty in China. He said the past 100 years had laid out some key concepts for success and guides for the future as the country readies for the second centenary goal of building China into a great modern socialist country. Among the most important, upholding the firm leadership of the party. And in the autumn, the all-important high-profile party plenum again was held in the center of Beijing. It delivered a landmark document, the resolution on the major achievements and historical experience of the CPC. The resolution is only the third of its kind in the party's history, and it presented the same core message.
一个国家，一个政党，领导核心至关重要。
For a country or political party, the core of leadership is crucial. Only when the Central Committee and the whole party have a core can the party gain strength.
And CPC officials say China is in a good place now to start on its new journey for common prosperity. They say efficiency and fairness will be balanced as the country plans to make institutional arrangements on distribution and development. Across industries, people we've been talking to say the tone set this year are especially meaningful as the 20th National Congress of the CPC is coming next year. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
2021 is another year of recovery, the year China forges on with its arduous battle against the pandemic. It's the year when life-saving vaccines become the norm, along with masks and COVID tests. Now, as the pandemic rages the world with new variants, China has responded quickly to control sporadic outbreaks across the country. But it knows it would be a grave mistake to relax vigilance against an enemy that continues to mutate into more insidious forms. On the Chinese mainland, nearly 3 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses have been administered up to now, and around 4 in 5 people have been fully vaccinated. China has extended more than 1.8 billion doses to over 120 countries and organizations, making it the biggest vaccine-providing country in the world. In November, President Xi Jinping has pledged that China will donate another 1 billion doses of vaccines to African countries. Pandemics are tragic events of world history that cannot be defeated without solidarity. And it seems like China is trying to set a good example for the world. CGTN's Wang Qiwei has more.
The year 2021 started in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. After moments of anxiety, despair and grief, China is on its way to recovery. Factory resumed operation. Schools reopened and shopping malls were once again bustling with people. Over time, we've learned to mask up and adapt. The phrases health code and nucleic acid test have become part of our daily vocabulary. The pandemic has changed the way we live, work, and travel. We hoped the pandemic would be a passing phase, but it wasn't, as new cases came in from beyond China's borders, and outbreaks happened sporadically across the country.
The whole area is under lockdown.
The epidemic has spread into 4 cities.
Outside one of Shijiazhuang quarantine hotels.
This is the second time there's been a COVID-19 outbreak in Ruili.
Whenever there's an outbreak, there's community-based quarantine, mass testing, and medical workers work day and night combating the virus. We have also witnessed the determination of some unsung heroes as the whole country stood together to face these challenges. Efforts have paid off. China has stepped up its vaccination program among both the young and the elderly. The country has also lived up to its promise in producing vaccines for countries in need.
疫苗是战胜疫情的利器。我多次强调，要把疫苗作为全球公共产品。
As scientists race to study the genetic makeup of COVID-19, the virus is mutating over time. And during the winter season, the Delta and Omicron variants are spreading fast around the world.
The pandemic will end when the world chooses to end it.
As we prepare to usher in the new year, there are hopeful signs for a better future. China's dynamic zero-case policy, approval granted for the country's first drug against COVID-19, accelerated vaccinations around the country and across the globe, preparations for the Beijing Winter Olympics in full swing for next February. China will continue to face the evolving enemy bravely until the war against the COVID-19 is finally won. Wang Qiwei, CGTN.
All right, and now let's get some more analysis. I'm pleased to be joined by Professor Chen Xi, Associate Professor of Health Policy and Economics at the Yale School of Public Health. He's also President of the China Health Policy and Management Society. Professor, great to have you with us on our special program. So we know that countries around the world have been adopting different strategies to fight COVID-19, but China has always been committed to this zero COVID policy. Help us understand the necessity here.
Yeah, China has maintained a zero COVID policy against the coronavirus spread, rolling out mass testing, frequent contact tracing, and long quarantine and strict border controls while increasing vaccination rate. This is given the high transmissibility of COVID and its variants like Delta, like Omicron. It is very important to maintain in the next few months at least about this strategy to establish herd immunity with a high vaccination rate. And it's also built on some other concerns. For example, the data, global data still suggests that this virus, the case fatality rate is still high above flu rate. So that means it kills more people than the flu season. So that's worrisome, although it's declining. And the second, given the overcrowded health sector, especially in the winter, and understaffed nursing practitioners, it's very important to maintain the treatment capacity of the hospitals. And also, China is also approaching the Winter Olympics, major events. All these concerns together make China to have this decision to be more prudent to maintain the dynamic zero COVID policy and increasing the vaccination rate and develop treatment before open up.
Well, there have been different measures to try to contain the pandemic. You mentioned mass testing and contact tracing. And we know that in 2021, China granted approval for the country's first anti-COVID drug. How does it help fight against the pandemic? How does it complement the use of vaccines in containing the spread of the pandemic?
Yeah, this is China's first approved neutralizing antibody cocktail. And the treatment involves a combination of two antibodies doses administered through injections and can be used to treat certain cases that are at a higher risk of progressing into severity. So it's very important for those high-risk patients once they are infected. So the therapy shows 80% of reduction in hospitalization and deaths in a global phase 3 trials. It's implemented in the trials in multiple countries. So, and they have very consistent message saying that this is safe and effective. And an additional treatment option for China is a treatment like this, which is effective for people already being infected. But I would say this may not replace the key role of vaccination, because vaccination is for people to prevent being infected. This is very important.
Well, people can pin their hopes on not only the vaccinations, but also this antiviral drug. Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing with us your perspective on this. With tightened pandemic control measures, China's economy has witnessed another year of recovery. And now let me bring in my colleague Xia Cheng. He's been covering many business stories here in China. Well, Xia Cheng, thank you for joining us. How has China's economy fared in 2021 on the economic front?
Well, Mama, let me give you more details. So China's Vice Premier Liu He says the country's annual economic growth is likely to exceed its expected target this year. Liu also said China's economy has continued recovering, with jobs, prices, and international payments keeping steady. In March, China set its GDP growth target above 6% for 2021, and that's 3.7 percentage points higher than 2020's GDP growth. The National Bureau of Statistics shows China's GDP grew nearly 10% in the first 3 quarters of 2021 compared with last year. And Liu said that next year, China will keep up with the stability and sustainability of its macroeconomic policy and make a better environment for small, medium-sized, and foreign companies. Liu added that China will more quickly develop the dual circulation paradigm focused on the domestic economy. In 2021, China introduced the digital yuan to fight currency volatility and enacted a new anti-monopoly law. The new anti-monopoly law is there with a few purposes. 1, making the market fairer. 2, preventing certain companies from monopolizing the market resources. For small companies, China launched a new stock bourse in Beijing to help more small and medium-sized companies get listed more easily. China's Academy of Social Sciences recommends the country's growth target should be set above 5% for 2022. China vows to double the size of the economy from 2020 levels by 2035. If we do the math here, that means China must grow 4.7% on average every year over the next 14 years. Now, as countries develop, their economic growth tends to slow down, so rates are expected to be even higher earlier on. As someone who keeps their ear to the ground, there's 3 things I think we should keep our eye on. And they are the property market, small companies, and green development. So let's talk about the property sector. Beijing has previously relied on stimulating property construction to revive growth. But for officials, that option is now off the table. Top officials have affirmed their commitment to controlling the property sector, nearly a quarter of China's economic output. In finance, China started a new stock exchange in Beijing to allow more small companies to go public. And finally, 2022 will put China 1 year closer to its 2030 carbon peak deadline. We'll see how specific policies aim to make growth greener. That's the year-end reflection of China's economy. Back over to you, Mama.
Well, pretty eventful year in 2021.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for walking us through the highlights. And in the bigger picture, the global economy has suffered in 2021 from COVID-19, energy shortages, and supply chain disruptions. But China's foreign trade continued strong growth. CGTN's Gao Ang looks back over the year.
In November, I covered the 4th China International Import Expo, one of the world's largest trade events here at the National Exhibition and Convention Center behind me. Nearly 3,000 companies from over 100 countries and regions took part. $70 billion worth of tentative deals were agreed. But it's just one indication of China's booming foreign trade.
Chinese exports surged by a third.
The numbers are very strong.
Chinese exports are doing very well.
And the trade balance between U.S. and China?
The domestic slowdown that...
How resilient can those trade numbers be going forward?
China's total imports and exports grew to over $5 trillion for the first 11 months this year, up 22% year on year. For comparison, that's about Japan's total GDP in 2020. Experts say that COVID has driven up China's exports of medical devices and household appliances for the past 2 years.
But this year's trade composition changed quite a bit because of the excessive monetary expansion in most of the Western economy. Their housing market received a big boost. We have seen the export surge in the decoration materials, equipment, tools, protection gears for labor.
ASEAN is now China's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade up by 38% year on year in the first half of 2021. And the world's largest free trade deal, RCEP, will take effect next year.
We are very excited that China and ASEAN, and in this case Malaysia, that we have now reached another level of cooperation with China.
And surprisingly, China-US tensions haven't affected trade that much. China's trade surplus with the U.S. rose to 2.3 trillion yuan, or $360 billion for the first 11 months. And demand for both consumer and industrial goods increased.
The only uncertainty now is whether the U.S. will eliminate the tariffs imposed for China's imports, which I think is highly likely.
This year marked the 20th anniversary of China's accession to the WTO. According to data from the UN, China's share of global trade increased to nearly 15% in 2020.
If we look at the fundamentals in China's economy, eventually it has to shift back to consumption as its main economic driver rather than export.
And while shipping cost still remains a big challenge among many uncertainties, analysts are still optimistic about China's foreign trade in the year to come. Gao Ang, CGTN, Shanghai.
You're now watching our special year-end program, China Resets. Let's now take a short break. 2021 is a year of recovery. We brush ourselves off and work to heal after facing health and economic challenges. Life returns to normal after chaos, and broken ties are being rebuilt. When the heavy rains stop and the sky clears, order is restored. Our loved ones return home from difficult journeys. We witness social changes that influence 1.4 billion people, while the nation pushes forward on its path to rejuvenation. CGTN brings you a closer look at the hardships and the successes of 2021 when China resets. The China-US rivalry has intensified and captured significant attention in recent years. Tensions over trade, cyber threats, and geopolitical issues have placed relations on ice. Rebuilding bilateral ties is crucial to prevent a further decoupling of the world's two largest economies. Chinese President Xi Jinping compared China and the United States to two giant ships sailing in the ocean. To ensure that the two giant ships do not collide, cooperation moved one and the only direction. In the second half of 2021, we saw more interaction and cooperation between China and the U.S. They send positive signals to the world that bilateral ties are thawing. But there are still moves from the U.S. that threaten the equilibrium of this strategic relationship. And now for a closer look at China-U.S. relations, let's hand things over to Elaine Reyes in our studio in Washington, D.C. Elaine?
2021 has been a year of change, and that certainly goes for relations between China and the U.S. January brought the inauguration of Joe Biden and many questions. Would his policies differ from the tension and tariffs of the Trump administration? CGTN White House correspondent Nathan King looks at how things developed over the year and where they stand now.
Warm words between the leaders of the two biggest economies as President Xi and President Biden began their November virtual summit.
We
should each run our domestic affairs well and at the same time shoulder our share of international responsibilities and work together to advance the noble cause of world peace and development. This is the shared desire of the people of our two countries and around the world, and the joint mission of Chinese and American leaders.
But 2021 was not a warm one in U.S.-China relations. The first high-level meeting with the new Biden administration and their Chinese counterparts was held in the frozen northern state of Alaska in March. The conversation was equally cool. Beijing was frustrated that the Biden administration essentially continued the confrontational policies of the Trump administration on trade, tariffs, sanctions over human rights, and excluding Chinese technologies. There was also problems with the deeper engagement with Taiwan by the U.S., and unlike the Trump administration, putting pressure on allies in Asia and Europe to join what Beijing views as the containment of China's rise.
Warships of the United States have repeatedly flaunted their strength and provoked troubles in the Taiwan Strait recently in the disguise of free navigation. This is not a promise of freedom and openness, but a deliberate interference and destruction of regional peace and stability. This is clear and obvious to the international community.
2021 also saw the first leaders' summit of the so-called Quad of Australia, India, Japan and the US, with a focus on moving supply chains of essential technologies like semiconductors and electric battery-powered tech away from China. The AUKUS military alliance with Australia and the UK and the US, which will supply Canberra with nuclear submarines, and a US-led diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics, and more than 200 bills in the US Congress to boost strategic competitiveness with China also added to woes. Increased cooperation with the island of Taiwan from Washington was perhaps the biggest provocation for Beijing.
If the U.S. really wants to play a constructive role in the peaceful development of the Asia-Pacific region, as it claims, it should truly respect the ASEAN-centered regional cooperation architecture instead of drawing ideological lines, forming cliques, or provoking confrontation among blocs.
But underneath these growing tensions, there's also an awareness that Washington and Beijing need to cooperate in areas that affect the whole planet, like climate change. The surprise announcement from the COP26 summit of deeper Chinese-American cooperation was welcomed globally. And following the Xi-Biden summit, smaller initiatives from military communications to granting more visas to journalists helped to improve slightly the political climate. The release of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou also helped ease tensions. Coordinated actions to increase global oil supplies, supply chains and tackling global inflation showed what the two powers can do when they cooperate. And stability in Afghanistan, on the Korean Peninsula and with Iran are also areas where Beijing and Washington are cooperating out of mutual self-interest. Washington continues to frame relations as strategic competition. Beijing sees it more like strategic confrontation. But continued COVID problems in the US and supply chain bottlenecks, coupled with rising inflation, could lead to reductions in tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese imports in 2022. But Beijing and other powers are also increasingly concerned about Washington's efforts to introduce an ideological component into relations with China and others. The recent so-called Summit for Democracy was a hand-picked invitation of like-minded other powers. And fears are that dividing the world into two different ideological camps could reduce the chances of cooperation in the future. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
2021 not only brought a changing of the guard in the White House, it also brought a new ambassador to Washington. Chen Gang was appointed China's new ambassador to the U.S. He said relations are at a critical juncture and stressed both sides must show mutual respect and maintain dialogue with a focus on cooperation. The world of sports offered a show of unity between China and the U.S. this year. Chinese and American ping pong players joined forces to play on the same team during last month's Table Tennis World Championship in Houston, Texas. The event also celebrated the 50th anniversary of ping pong diplomacy, a series of events that led to the establishment of ties. Only time will tell whether the relationship between the world's two largest economies will improve in 2022. And that's it from us here in Washington. Now back to our colleagues in Beijing.
Thanks so much, Elaine. Now, for an in-depth analysis of China-U.S. relations, I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Zhao Hai. He is a research fellow at Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Well, Dr. Zhao, great to have you with us on our program. So, competition and friction between China and the United States are on the rise on different fronts. For example, tariff wars, economic sanctions, investment restrictions. And we're also seeing more confrontations between the world's two largest economies. But meanwhile, there's also cooperation on climate change issues. What do you think is going to truly determine the strength of China-U.S. relations in the future?
Well, that's a good question. Recently, there's a great debate about where the U.S.-China relations is going. And considering latest development that you mentioned, the relationship is getting more complex and complicated. I think there are three major factors that will affect the future relationship. Number one is China's own development, whether or not China can handle its own development, economic development, technology, modernization, and its relationship with the outside world. As long as China continue its current trajectory and grow its economy and becoming stronger, the U.S.-China relations will getting stabler so far in the future. And secondly, how the U.S. will perceive its own power and its position in the world is also very important in relation to U.S.-China relations. So if the U.S. continue to believe that it needs to maintain its hegemony and maintain its dominance in the world and refuse to cooperate with other emerging powers, then this relationship is very complicated and hard to manage. Particularly, it's prone to crisis and confrontational relationship. And the third part is actually how the other emerging powers, global powers that seize U.S.-China relations, whether or not others will see that this relationship is going to the so-called new Cold War, or they refuse to accept that this world will return back to the old Cold War days. Right now, under the influence of the pandemic, people-to-people interactions are freezing, and there are domestic poisonous environment in the U.S. And also, the U.S. is continuing their current policy to surround and contain China. So hopefully, the U.S. government get back to their professionalism and pragmatism and judging the U.S.-China relations in a broader strategic level.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Zhao Hai, for your analysis. We appreciate your time. And now let's take a look back on some of China's major diplomatic events this year. restoration is another key concept that sums up 2021. We witnessed an increasing number of climate change-related disasters. China faced the challenge of post-disaster reconstruction. When calamity strikes, the level of competence and speed in disaster response spells the difference between life and death. China has shown great capabilities in crisis management. In July, record rainfall unseen in 60 years lashed central China's Henan province. Dozens died, millions of lives were upended as transportation was suspended, highways closed, and flights canceled. Authorities launched emergency services, disaster management personnel, and its army to support the rescue operation. Our reporter Xia Ruixue was there and looks back now at those disastrous events this summer.
Few people around the world had heard of Zhengzhou before the devastating rain and floods this summer. I grew up in southern China where it rains a lot, but Zhengzhou has a very typical northern China climate, windy, dry, and cold. I've been here for nearly 10 years and doesn't rain that much, even in the summer. But this summer, I saw the biggest rainstorm of my life. The rain actually lasted 3 days, but heaviest downpour was on July 20th, more than 550 millimeters, almost as much as city's average for a whole year. This is outside my apartment building. The image of floodwater pouring into the garage is still vivid in my mind. It all happened so fast. Water supplies and power were cut off, and I was trapped at home, unable to buy drinking water or candles. 3 hours later, there was no mobile network. I was completely shut off from the outside world. After being trapped without any electricity, water, and a mobile network for 24 hours, I managed to get out of my home and reunited with my colleagues.
I'm now in Zhengzhou, central China's Henan province. It's Wednesday afternoon after 24 hours.
On July 20th, the heaviest hour of rainfall ever recorded in China, 201.9 millimeters fell on Zhengzhou between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. Around 6 p.m. that day, floodwater broke through the flood control near Wulongkou Station on Line 5 of the city's subway system. The trains inside the tunnel were filled with water, trapping passengers inside. There was an intense search and rescue effort. 14 people were found dead. It's hard to imagine a city with a population over 10 million was submerged in water. Everything ground to a halt, but social media filled with videos of local residents helping each other and volunteering to take part in rescue efforts. And we will never forget rescuers from across the country who helped the city recover. For instance, pumping water from the tunnels or garages, restoring the subway, power supplies and mobile network, and giving us food. These torrential rains tested the city's ability to withstand climate risks and people's reactions to the disaster. As a country that has suffered frequent natural disasters, many say that the country needs to enhance the system to adapt to a fast-changing climate. Xia Ruixue, CGTN, Zhengzhou, Henan Province.
Through fires and hurricanes, heat waves and flash floods, the world is seeing the effects of global warming. China says combating climate change requires a joint effort. Let's now see what the country has been doing in 2021. Brian Dorman has more.
In September, ahead of the COP26 conference, Chinese President Xi Jinping reiterated the country's goal to peak carbon emissions by 2030 and reach carbon neutrality by 2060. China says it will accelerate its low-carbon transition and push industries like manufacturing, construction, and transportation to restructure over the next 5 years and beyond. In July, the government launched its first national emissions trading scheme, too, creating the world's largest carbon market. 4.1 million tons of CO2 credits worth $32 million were traded on the first day. China is also shifting away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. Solar, wind power, and hydropower assets in China account for more than a third of the world's total, and that's expected to grow. harboring nearly 10% of all plant species and 14% of all animals on Earth, China also sees biodiversity protection as an integral part of tackling climate issues. After 30 years of efforts, China's national treasure, the giant pandas, are no longer classified as endangered. In October, the biggest UN Biodiversity Summit in a decade, COP15, kicked off in southwest China's Kunming City. Over 100 countries jointly adopted the Kunming Declaration. The last time the world made such an agreement was more than 10 years ago. The government also announced plans to establish more national parks as the first step in building a natural protected land system. The key words this time around: ambition, but also implementation. Brian Dorman, CGTN.
On January 1st, 2021, China imposed a 10-year fishing moratorium on all natural waterways along the Yangtze River. 3 months later, the Yangtze River Conservation Law came into effect as part of efforts to boost biodiversity protection. By the end of 2021, over 80 species of fish were discovered in the section that passes through Jiangsu province. That's 10 species more compared to 2018. Now, Yangtze is China's longest river and the third longest in the world. Its location and impact on people's lives have turned it to what the Chinese nation call the Mother River. In CGTN's special series, The Mighty Yangtze, our reporters embarked on a spectacular journey. As you can see, some of the rare footage there. From the pristine Qinghai Tibet Plateau at over 4,000 meters high to cosmopolitan Shanghai at sea level. They traveled more than 6,000 kilometers to explore the importance of biodiversity protection and how we can coexist with nature as humans. The answer to this question can contribute to the pursuit for building a greener China in decades to come. Next year, the second part of the UN Biodiversity Conference will be held in China, and we'll certainly keep an eye on that and revisit the cities to see how successful China's efforts have been. All right, now let's get some more insights on China's role in combating climate change. I'm pleased to be joined by Ma Jun. He is the director of Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs, a nonprofit environmental research organization. Well, Mr. Ma, thank you so much for joining us on our show. So China as a developing country shares the same burden of curbing emissions as developed nations. And some argue that developed economies should set and achieve more ambitious reduction goals than developing countries. And this has always been a dividing point at the UN Climate Change Conference. What is your take on this?
Thank you, Momong. I think developed countries contributed most of the historical global emissions. Meanwhile, the capacity of maintaining a sustainable climate action differs from country to country based on their own stages of economic development. In order to distribute climate duty among countries in an equitable manner, UN Convention on Climate Change has established the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, which requires the developed countries to take the lead in their action. Along with the vast social economic development, we need to recognize China's annual per capita CO2 output is catching up with that of Europe, but still lower than that of America and Australia. In terms of accumulated emission, it is much lower on the per capita level. To deal with the pressing common challenge, China enhanced its national contribution with a commitment to carbon neutrality before 2060. Most developed countries have pledged to go carbon neutral by 2050. So the key issue now is for developed countries to put words into action and really fulfill the pledge to compensate the least developed countries.
And also China's dual carbon target, which means the carbon peak and also the carbon neutrality targets, will make it the most efficient country in the world in terms of reducing carbon emissions. And if it's successful, the country will realize carbon neutrality from carbon peaking in the shortest time in global history. What are some of the hurdles in achieving that process?
Yeah, we need to recognize China is still going through this massive development, and it has 1.4 billion people. So So the energy supply is a crucial issue to China's social economic development. But in the meantime, this is also the biggest source of China's carbon emission. So the biggest hurdle now is how the transformation of China's energy mix, which is still dominated by fossil fuel. So in the future, China will continue to expand capacity of renewable energy, while in the meantime, the intermittent nature means that we need to build the capacity on energy storage, power storage, transformation, transmission, and the smart generation and power grid. This requires a lot of innovation and technological breakthroughs.
Yeah, ambitious targets, and the clock is ticking. China's determined to achieve those goals. Thank you so much, Mr. Ma Jun, for your insights on this. Appreciate it. 2021 is also a year of reform. This year, we have witnessed many social changes. And now I'm pleased to be joined here by our reporter Li Jianhua, who's been paying close attention to the social changes in this country over the years. Well, Jianhua, you've covered so many issues this year. What are some of the stories that impressed you the most?
Yes, of course, Mama. You know, reform is absolutely one of the key words for 2021. And a slew of new policies affecting Chinese people's lives was rolled out this past year. Chief among them were the three-tied policy announced at the end of May. Health officials have expressed hope this will maximize the population's role in driving economic and social growth and reverse a downward trending fertility. The policy falls in line with the aim to bring China's low birth rate back up, going back to 2013. That's when Chinese couples were allowed to have a second child if either parent was an only child. Then in 2016, Chinese couples were allowed to have two children, phasing out the one-child policy imposed at the end of the 1970s. To boost the birth rate, more incentives have been proposed, like financial incentives and easier access to nurseries and hospitals, as well as more days of paid parental leave. Another policy this year may be good news for students. The government introduced a double reduction guideline in August, aiming to reduce excessive homework and after-school tutoring burdens. The guideline requires all curriculum-based tutoring institutions to register as non-profit organizations. And the Chinese President Xi Jinping has said education shouldn't focus too much on test results and that good grades are only a short-term gain. He encourages students to develop healthy and mature personalities instead. Another game changer this year came in August with the Cyberspace Administration's crackdown on online fandom culture deemed by many as unhealthy. The move strives to reduce frenzied idol worshipfulness among Android fans. Under the policy, lists ranking celebrities were removed from online platforms. The policy also bans any promotional event stoking competition schemes among fans or celebrities. The crackdown followed several scandals with celebrities involved in tax evasion, suspicions of rape or other criminal activities in China. Back to you, Mamang.
Yeah, thank you so much for walking us through all those highlights. And now here's a recap of some legal stories that made headlines across the country in 2021. This summer, a herd of elephants' journey to return home has grabbed global attention. No one's sure what made this family of Asian elephants leave their home in a nature reserve in southwestern China's province of Yunnan. But they set up on a trip of more than 1,300 kilometers from Xishuangbanna all the way north to Yunnan's provincial capital of Kunming before turning back. Along the way, they stopped to smell the fragrance of pu'er tea leaves, bathed in the rain of Yuxi, and enjoy the scenery of Dianchi Lake. Tracking the elephant's walk was a chance for us to appreciate China's beauty and remind of us why we should protect our environment at all costs. Hi, cutie. You must have had a really good time wandering around. All right, now let's take a review of the herd's journey. The wild Asian elephants left their forest home in Xishuangbanna Dai Autonomous Prefecture in March 2020. After passing through several counties, they arrived in Kunming, provincial capital of Yunnan, on June 2nd. As you can see on the map, they retraced their steps back home. On August the 8th, they crossed the Yuanjiang River with help from their human friends. And 4 days later, the herd arrived at Mojiang County and back to their habitat. Local authorities invested huge manpower and material resources to safeguard elephants on their epic journey. Thousands of police were deployed and nearly 3,000 drones monitored the animals' movements around the clock. The drones covered nearly 3,000 kilometers. And to avoid human-elephant conflict, more than 150,000 people were evacuated to safe areas. Also, some 180 tons of food were allocated and spread out along their route to guide them away from human settlements. Insurance companies received more than 1,500 claims for damage to homes, with a total value exceeding 5 million yuan, or around $802,000. Our Yang Jinghao traveled to Xishuangbanna to find out more.
I'm here at the Xishuangbanna Nature Reserve in Yunnan Province, a major habitat for Asian elephants. Last year, a herd of the giant animals left and went on an epic northward journey that captured worldwide attention. Over a year on, they've come back to these tropical rainforests, safe and sound. During the 1,000-plus kilometer trek, they tramped over mountains, strolled around urban areas, raided farmlands, and snuck into local farmers' homes. Shen Qingzhong is an expert for a government-led special mission. He says the migration provided a rare opportunity to learn more about the gigantic mammals.
I was surprised to see how they climbed over the high flat wall, especially a baby elephant. It was totally beyond my expectations, and we found that the animal has a stronger ability to adjust to new environments than we thought.
Behind the safe return were efforts by government officers, experts, and residents along the way, conducting round-the-clock monitoring, building temporary roadblocks, and preparing various food for the elephants. A task force took every possible means to protect the animals from harm or from disrupting human communities. A special swimming pool was even built before they set foot on a bridge leading to a suitable habitat.
They would have been exhausted after such a long trek. The pond provided them a place to drink and have fun. This not only helped them cool down, but they could also get some nutrients their bodies needed.
Shen and other experts say policymakers should reflect on the incident to ensure a comfortable habitat with abundant food for the elephants. Their homecoming may be the end of the journey, but it heralds the start of another pressing mission, which calls on society to engage in the protection of wildlife. Yang Jinghao, CGTN, Yunnan Province.
An exceptional group of people also returned home in 2021. The taikonauts of the Shenzhou 12 mission arrived on Earth after a 3-month stay in China's space station, the Tiangong. A month later, the Shenzhou 13 crew took off. And they are now 2 months into a 6-month mission in the Tiangong. And when they return, they will set the record for the longest day in space in Chinese history. Now, the crew of 3 includes a female astronaut, Wang Yaping. She became the first Chinese woman to walk in space. The crew's vital mission is to ensure the all systems and components on the space station are working seamlessly as the country aims to complete the construction of the Tiangong by 2022. China has made remarkable strides in space exploration, all made possible by collective efforts. And now let's find out more about the project with our reporter Liu Jiaxin.
In 2021, Chinese astronauts started their journey at the space station. The Tianhe, the space station's most critical module, launched into space on April the 29th, followed by 2 cargo and manned missions. The astronauts traveled to the space station in batches to complete verification of key technology and construction tasks. In September, Shenzhou 12 astronauts ended their 3-month stay in space and safely returned to Earth, while the crew of Shenzhou 13 took over and continued to work in space.
The most notable event during Shenzhou 13 mission would be a 60-minute science lecture from space.
同学们现在是不是对浮力有了更加深刻的认识了呢？
The whole event was televised live to a global audience, and the ground technicians who sit here at the Flight Control Center ensured that the whole program ran smoothly.
In 2022, we will launch the experimental module Wentian and Mengtian to complete the construction of China's space station.
For our astronaut system, we also need to send Shenzhou 14 and Shenzhou 15 crew to complete several months of flight missions.
刘嘉欣 CGTN, Beijing.
The Tokyo Olympics ignited much enthusiasm for sports this year. And in 2022, the Olympic flame will return to Beijing once again. It will be the first city to host both the Summer and Winter Games. In Tokyo, Team China performed strongly in sports that it traditionally dominates, such as table tennis, diving, and weightlifting. And we also saw some major breakthroughs. And now we're joined by our sports anchor, Wang Dong, to tell us more. Well, Wang Dong, you've been covering the Olympic Games for over 2 decades.
True.
But tell us which events or who excited you the most at the Summer Games?
Well, Mamong, do we have a day to talk over? There are so many national heroes from China, really. And one name that I need to mention is definitely Su Bingtian, the name that shouldn't be forgotten at all. At the age of 31, this veteran broke the Asian record in the men's 100-meter semifinals in Tokyo with an amazing result, 9.83 seconds. And this made him the first Chinese man ever to qualify for the final of the event. And up next is another sensation from China, only 16 years old, Guan Chenchen, and she took home China's first gold medal in women's gymnastics since the 2012 London Games, unseating her own idol in the finals, namely Team USA's Simone Biles. And in the swimming pool, Team China broke the world record to win the women's 4x200-meter freestyle relay. That is also sensational. In addition to that, the all-star table tennis, we call it Dream Team right there, got tested in the final as well, with a younger generation of players involved. It was, however, able to back 4 out of 5 goals for the Chinese team. Amazing again. And the younger players say they will be even better down the line to do a cleanup at the Paris Games.
So we still remember the 1-year countdown, the 100-day countdown, and now it's a little more than a month away.
I'm saying the time is on the wind.
Yeah, what are some of the things that stand out most to you in terms of the preparation for the Winter Games in Beijing?
I think as far as this area, we're so proud of the preparations, but the venues are really worth mentioning. And in the Beijing area, many venues have been adapted and reused from the 2008 Summer Games. A few are newly constructed though. And with vertical drops of up to 900 meters, the new National Alpine Skiing Center is said to be one of the world's steepest courses, offering gorgeous views if you're ready for that. And if you're also you're able to enjoy the amazing and breathtaking speed at that moment. And in addition to that, the Capital Indoor Stadium is the famous site of what's been known as the ping pong diplomacy way back to 1971. And next, the sport of free skate in big air will make its Olympic debut at the Shougang Stadium, which was built on the site of a former steel mill. And for the first time in Olympic history, Beijing has introduced a transcritical carbon dioxide direct cooling refrigeration system. I know, complex really sounds like that. This technology, however, is supposed to cut emissions and speed up the ice-making process. Well, totally on the cutting edge. Mama?
Thank you so much, Wang Dong.
Sure.
Our journey through the calendar is coming to an end. Putting a whole year into 1 hour is never easy. Our intention is to review with you what was going on in this part of the world, to see the moments China held dear. And hopefully by doing so, we could put the pieces together to form our unique yet collective memory of 2021. As for the future, as we say time and again, there's still so much to look forward to. Happy New Year, everyone. I'll see you in 2022.
For the welfare of the people overall is one of my lifelong wishes.
分秒必争，为人民、为国家多干点事儿。To find the best word is innovation. It's recreation.
我听到的时候，全身发抖。
美国century, war is next.
因为我看不见目标在哪里，但我知道我每走一步都会离目标更近。